Why Neverland?
Well, it's because I was considering calling it Severland.
Sever?
And sever, to sever, to cut, you know?
Yes.
And I may still use that in some capacity. So please, nobody steal that. That's mine.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the notion there is, first of all, uh, some real serious and drastic consideration of the notion of the privatization of a living thing. The notion of being able to privatize and own a living thing upon which, as it happens, your very existence depends. It's a very ironic inversion of what ownership should more reasonably be, that you should be owned. It seems to me makes a lot more sense as a human being. You should be owned by that upon which you depend. And that's it sets the record straight, no? Historically, creationally, if that's a word. And but we don't have it right. We have it wrong. And so we're the boss, and we decide where the lines are. And we live as if they're right, as if they're true. You know, in my corner of the world, the native people had a name for the allegation of the separation between Canada and the United States that the surveyors had just arbitrarily put somewhere. They called it, of all things, the medicine line. And I think the reason for that was not that they were so impressed with this allegation of a line going through the prairies, which is kind of a goofy idea, but they couldn't believe the importance that the white people came to this imaginary line with. And so I think it was a recognition that the colonists of the time were infatuated with the notion of separation and severance and subsequent diminishment of mutuality and the commons. Of course, all these things are gone. And I think the natives were floored, as we might say, or flabbergasted, that we could live our whole lives as if something was true that nobody could see. Yeah. So that hence the severance and or Severland. Neverland, though, it will take all of those things and extend them a bit further and a bit deeper and in a bit in a more tragically. I think that'd be one promise I could keep. That excuse me a second. That it's not clear to me that anyone who looks like me in this world, I'm going to extend it beyond Anglo-North America, that anybody who looks like me in this world now has the capacity to conduct themselves as if they genuinely belong where they are. The closest we can get is that we own where we are. And I suppose it's the difference between instinct and habit. Yeah? Instincts are what we envy in animals and fancy ourselves to be able to rewild ourselves accordingly. And habit is what we have instead. Habit is a kind of domesticated or lapsed or feral instinct. And I think we now have the habit of ownership, the habit of land severance, the habit of private property, the habit of you can't go here because I own it. And, you know, there's lots of others that are secondarily attached, but it's a great lament, among other things, to come to an understanding that the place that you imagine grants you respite and reprieve and rest, so-called home, is predicated so severely on the severance between you and the place upon which you genuinely depend. I mean, genuinely, and not in the sense of lamentable, genuine dependence, a kind of dependence that belongs. It's just not available. I mean, I don't want to speak for other places, but I've been lucky enough to travel around. And man, there's so much evidence of homelessness from place to place, especially in places that, if I may put it this way, should know better, that have been around for a while, culturally speaking, that have a kind of cultural linear, maybe not intactness is the right word, but at least a recognizable through line over time, perhaps like your home place. And, the question desperately needs to be asked again. What does your sense of being at home reside in? What does it depend upon? What does it banish? What can it not tolerate? Things like this. So I mean, all of these things give you a sense that the usually available books about earth science, which are valuable in their right, for sure. I mean, I've looked at them, a lot of them. Or books called dirt, which is what I was originally going to call something. And then I realized, oh my God, there's half a dozen books called dirt so far. These things are very valuable, and I'm glad they're there. but the matters of the heart, kind of associative sorrow, generally speaking, they're not there. They're kind of warnings. And I think I've passed through the stage of being a warning person. I think I'm bordering on the line of being a pure descriptor now. And I perhaps that's the most prophetic function left to me. So by virtue of whatever abilities I have with the spoken word, I think a simple record of how things actually are is valuable in a polemical time.
You sound or feel timely and at the same time somewhat ahead of the times, because it seems you're proposing a correction to a correction to our misplaced ways of inhabiting the world. While, at least from my perspective, some people have perhaps started to wake up and going in one direction, but here you are with your poetic prose describing that counter correction to the correction. Perhaps that's a bit confusing, but you say something about that feeling of mine.
It's a excuse me, it's an honoring allegation you make about what I'm trying to do. I don't know if I don't think I'm ahead of anything. I think I'm so far behind, I'm at the back of the line. And when you're at the back of the line and the line continues to shuffle in a snake-like fashion, it's not always clear, where the ending is and where the beginning is. So I may be so old-fashioned as to appear novel. And maybe that's what you're recognizing. Certainly the function is old-fashioned, isn't it? It's Old Testamentish, I suppose. And I like you and like many people listening, I observe in a fearsome way the solution machine generating the latest fixes. I'm on this receiving end of an enormous number of demands and requests and expectations to fix things, to have the one-size-fits-all spandex solution to things that apparently, if you have a capacity to see things for what they are, it only stands to reason that you would know how to fix it all. That apparently that's all that it takes, is to be able to see things for what they are, and boom, you're the Noam Chomsky of everything. So I'm not the Noam Chomsky of anything. We have one of those. He's an aged character now, but one is plenty. I think my job is to assume a certain responsibility that's been abandoned and foreclosed upon in a general way, by anyone who claims an understanding of themselves as a Western or Westernized person. Nobody needs to know what to do. We do need to know how we came by these things that we think are either inevitable or naturally occurring or unavoidable. This, our sense of fatalism on the matter is one of the ways we got here. So I'm hoping I'm confounding this understanding of fatalism simply by engaging in a fair-minded reimagination of how did the problem, it comes to this, how did the fundamental problems that face us and our children come to be? Let's credit ourselves with the real possibility that we had some discernment once upon a time, and that we employed it from time to time. Because here's the confoundment. If we're reasonably intelligent people sometimes, if we're not acting on pure self-interest all the time, if we have a historical alertness or awareness sometimes, how did it ever come to be then that the things we know are bordering on satanic presences among us were once deemed to be a good idea?
Mhm.
Not only found to be acceptable, but persuasive. The machine would be a good example. Just the advent of a thing called a machine and its distinction from tool, which is a interesting trail to follow. How did we ever decide that we'd had enough of elders and the elder function among us, and that it's time for middle-aged people to shine? How did we ever come to the understanding that we're all so equally capable that in seriousness, with a straight face, someone can ask me in a teaching session to understand that their own 6-year-old son could be their elder? I mean, you don't know what to say sometimes.
What do you expect of the participants / audience / people who will come to your event? And also tied to what you just said, what's the exercise without psychologizing it too much? This is not, I'm going to say what I think it's not about. It's not about guilt or hope or repentment. What is it about, and what's the work or the skills you, I'm going to say wish, but it's not even wish, you open yourself for your audience to work upon?
Yeah, this is not an uncommon question, and it requires a degree of clairvoyance that I'm not sure I possess. But I could take things off the list and narrow it down. One, it's ill-advised today that people content themselves with being an audience. So I will do everything I can to subvert the notion that people are sitting like this, waiting for something to happen, making notes, wondering whether it was worth it. Shouldn't they be doing something else? I'm vaguely entertaining, the Caesar function, etc. Right? I mean, on your off hours, if you must, do all that stuff. But we're going to proceed like certain things are at stake in real time. So I'm possessed of a sense of urgency. In case that doesn't come through, I'm formally acknowledging it. And my sense of urgency is kind of relentless, you know, and it's informed by where I am in my time, that I'm not, it's not clear that there's a whole lot longer for me to have anything to say or to be considered. So while I can, I must. That's my translation. Yeah. So I do have that thing, and I do not apologize for it. I understand that it's not everyone's attraction, but it's a kind of necessity. You know, this is a question partly normally about process. I'm not a process guy. I'm just telling you right now So if anybody's thinking to come to this in order to work out their personal dilemmas in real time and use me or the people on either side of them to do it, they got the wrong guy. So I'm not a process guy, right? And here's why. You can just get that anywhere. You can sign up for anything. You don't have to come anywhere to do that. You can get that for next to nothing. Any book you open will give you the 5 steps and the 10 stages and all of that thing, you know? So this is something else. This is a stilling thing, not a compelling thing. This is an interruption in normally scheduled programming. This is a kind of rupture in the ease machine. This is a willingness to stop and subsequently to slow down in that order. Yeah. So it's not instinctively in a troubled time like the one we're in. That's not where you go. You go in the direction of mobilization, isn't it? What do we do next? Just tell us what in all of that thing. And we're not going to do that. And the ground beneath us will oblige us to do so. Somewhere in there, speaking of the ground beneath us, we will not imitate or enact. We will take the earth in our hands and see if we can pray it in the direction of some kind of crucible or container. I mean, this is not a process and it's not a symbol. This is actually what we're going to do. So we'll be attended to by people who are ceramic experts. And in case anybody was a little bit lost with the ideas, the making of clay and the clay, what the clay makes of us, is fundamental to being there and achieving the goal of being there, not of trying to get somewhere else and using this place to do it, but of being in this place now for a while.
That's very fascinating and strange to hear. Not a springboard to then go out into the world and carry those seeds with us, but just dive deep in the dirt in a way.
Sometime before the seeds.
Yes, yes. I would like to hear also about this book that is already happening or coming to you, that you'll, part of it at least, you'll write while in Pari, and also how that would culminate or maybe even take a break or be shown to the world during the event. How do you see that? And what's that? That sounds like a process to me. And I'm wondering why you chose to do it in Pari and have the midwife that book, and also how does that play and dance with the coming of some people, including myself, to then work with you on that?
Well, the book in question has begun to exist. This is the latest. It's actually in here. So it's come to me, and it's not behaving well because it's supposed to wait until I get there. But if I wake up early enough in the morning, generally speaking, there are whispers immediately upon awakening that drive me in the direction of this. So I give you an example. I'm going to read to you from what came to me earlier today. Earlier today is before there was any light, I should say, because it's very early where I'm sitting. And I was thinking, I'm in the process of raising a barn on my farm. It's a restitution of a 120-year-old barn that was disassembled, moved, and is now being re-erected for the first time as a barn in many years, actually. So it's a great privilege. And as it rose up, I was staggered and stunned by my own reaction. So I'm going to tell you 2 stories as a parallel and then read this little piece to you. Years ago, when we first began to farm in Eastern Ontario, which has no growing season to speak of at all. So it's a ludicrous thing to say farm in Eastern Ontario. That is a contradiction in terms. But anyway, we do what we can. And we were setting post holes in the ground and then setting the posts in anticipation of the fence. And so far it's unspectacular, you know? So we unrolled a great long length of fence, and with a machine called a come along, we were taking the slack out of the fence, and it moved, and then as the slack disappeared, it started to raise up by itself virtually. It was kind of magical. But the real magic, if that's the right word for it, is what happened to me when the thing came upright and leaned against the fence of its own apparent volition, leaned against the post rather. I was absolutely stymied. I was stupefied at my own upheaval, my own arousal. It was sensual, and it was bizarre that here I was drawing one of these imaginary lines across a field and experiencing a sense of primordial excitement and trespass at the same time. And I watched this happen in me, and I was mystified. Yeah. And the same thing began to happen when the barn became three-dimensional and started to rise up. So I was thinking, this is not me. This is too old. This has been around, surely to God, as long as cultivation has been around, and the severance of land and all the things we alluded to off the top. And so I was wondering, how might the first grain storage place, what must it have been to the first people who came with the understanding that there's a thing called a surplus, which is one of the great blasphemies of humans' time in creation, our notion of surplus. And this is what I wrote about it this morning. That first granary, that wasn't a strong box against thieves. It wasn't an extra pocket to keep the spare change of a cultivating life in. It wasn't even a chapel in the pines, standing in for the real thing downtown. That first granary, it was a cathedral. It was a holy place, a man-made God house, a contraction of all the made world. A condensation of all the millions of prayers for sustenance and for mercy and for more. That's what happens to me when I wake up. So this project, this writing of this book, I'm not using coming to Pari to do it. I could do it at home with a lot less wear and tear on me. I am doing it now. But it seemed to me that if I give myself the task of coming up with something real and useful and tangible in real time, and give myself the structure in which to do it, and the expectation and the time limit, with an understanding that at the end of it, it's not a book I'm supposed to come with. It's a manifesto. And that involves, it includes, it needs other people. So it's a kind of contracted attention span. It's a very condensed, kind of infrared attention span. And that's, that's the structure I agreed to obey by saying, I'll write a book and then, or get as close as I can. And then the people who come will be the first ones to be let in on this book in real time as a thing that may yet live. That was the decision.
I'm surprised by your saying that it needs, or that you need, that this project needs other people, because the way you speak and write is often, as I've told you in the past, it's another kind of English language, and it you're saying it, and the fact that you're saying it, even as a ceremony, I suppose means you're saying it to other human beings. But the way you say it is and sounds unscrutable and at the same time obvious. And so it surprises me to hear, perhaps for the first time, that you need the other people for that ceremony. In what way do you need the other people being there while being there?
Well, this may sound odd to your ear, but in a life lived with a lot of isolation, not all of it of my own choosing, I don't seek after isolation. Really, I don't. Solitude, I appreciate. But isolation is a different quality, no? And the more my capacity to articulate or elaborate is tied to the troubles of the times, the more alone I tend to be. So I know for my own little sake that I should put some kind of limits or fence around my isolation, not to banish it, not to even it out, not to balance it, simply to give my heart some holiday, a holy day, for my capacity to be sorrowed on behalf of, other people who are too busy, understandably too busy to be sorrowed. I'm not that busy. I mean, if you look at my schedule, you'd probably not say so, but in terms of busyness, this, that day, this, all the days disappearing up the chimney of busyness, I don't have that kind of busyness. And I suppose I'm lucky that way, but it's also an affliction because I can't be easily distracted from what claims me. And I'm not the only one. And so this is not a smoke signal of distress, this event in Pari. This is an attempt to employ a kind of like-minded willingness to be something more than panicked, something more than stymied, and something more than paralyzed by the troubles of the times. And the truth of the matter is that the dirt will outlast our sorrow about the dirt. So there's some consolation there, but the consolation has to take a shape. At the end of the day, it can't be we'll feel better about ourselves. There's not a lot to feel good about as far as our track record goes. So we have to craft a range of emotional response that's not finally absolving because it's so hard, or because we didn't ourselves do it, or because we have a little backyard garden with some flowers. It's a wonderful thing if you do, but it's not making any difference. Things are getting worse. And then there's the ground. And in English, at least, the word ground or earth, these things have a symbolic resonance that's probably worn out by now. I mean, the New Age people love the phrase, to be grounded and so on. But I wish it meant what the word suggests it meant, to be less and less a stranger to the place you call home. So maybe at the end of the day, it's a kind of strategizing for homefulness. You won't find this word in the Spanish dictionary, but I hereby anoint the word as a very valuable notion, homefulness. It takes care of your hopefulness.
Yes. Yes, it's more real. It's more real, definitely.
I think so. It gives you an opportunity to do it without a massive change of material circumstance.
Mhm.
We're talking here, Àlex, about work. We're not talking about inspiration. At least I'm not. We're not talking about how to feel better about yourself.
Mhm.
We're talking about the thing that was entrusted to us now, right? So I don't know how to elaborate any more severely the stakes that we're facing. No, so this is an older guy, an attempt to operate without making us the reason why. The world is the reason why.
Let me bring a few words and let's see what you can make of them, because you were talking about straight lines. I was mentioning correction, rectus, right? Go straight and correct. And then there's also a sense of, again, this double turn and return and torsion and twist and distortion and to solve and to absolve and to dissolve. All these movements going on, I think, in what you're saying. And let me ground these by asking you to clarify something that you've hinted on other occasions, which is, here you are, a Canadian going back to Europe to talk about this kind of orphanhood and homelessness and homefulness.
Right.
There's a constellation going on. There's a turn and a return and this dissolution and absolution going on there.
There is. It's very well observed, and probably I should have led with that, but I actually didn't think of it because it's fairly early in the morning for me. But you're absolutely right. Here I am, your orphan, right? I mean, I think it's rooted, this endeavor is rooted, excuse me, in the following experience. I don't remember which time when I came to Europe, but it might have been the first time when I came to Europe to work. And it may have been in England, I think it was. And in the middle of what I was talking about, something came to me and it said, "Say me now." And it was apparently a non sequitur. But I looked up from what I was doing, which was probably death related at the time. And I said, "Do you ever think of us?" And needless to say, nobody knew what I meant. Do you ever think of us? And the people in the room who were not embarrassed were flustered. They couldn't figure out why this mattered. And who's the you I'm addressing? And who's this us? And is it not, at least linguistically, a continuum? So how can you possibly talk about us and you and so on? But I didn't clarify. I waited. And sometimes not saying anything can be its own eloquence. So I waited until it finally became clear that they couldn't take it any further. And I said, let me answer from your silence. Almost never, isn't it true? Aside from the odd news report, you don't think of us. You don't wonder what became of you when we turned into us, do you? No. Now ask me. And nobody would. I said, no, come on. It's really important that you ask me if we ever think of you. And somebody finally did, God bless them. And I said, every day. And a lot of people in the room wept with no elaboration. What do you make of that? No? This is an amazing moment, isn't it? Who are we to each other, this so-called new world and this so-called old world? And what became of us here, as we were becoming this thing? How much did we lose? How much we were obliged to set aside? How much of you did we lose to turn into us? Who can we possibly be to each other now? Is there a kinship that we can count on? Should there be? Who should we properly understand ourselves to be? Some kind of continuity binds us? Or is the only continuity disrepair and rupture and dislocation? And is this the reason why there's so much hankering for solution in the face of disillusion? So one of the things I'm going to do is not proceed as if we're all in the same boat and we're all the same people and that history doesn't matter. And the problems are so severe that history is now just a joke. And the distinctions are artificial. They're not at all. They're there. And, we on this side are so incapable where our own ancestry is concerned. And our disability to have ancestors, or if I could put it this way, our inability to have you is traceable in how we are with the ground under our feet where we are. Where we proceeded once upon a time, not that long ago, as if it was endless and bottomless. And all our transgressions are a consequence of this assumption of bottomless infinity available to us, called a whole continent. And it seems to me from a distance that so many of your transgressions in the old world are a consequence of not taking seriously or not taking to your soul the landlocked limitations that are entrusted to you. We don't understand ourselves to be on a little piece of ground, with all the terrible socio-political and economic limitations that intrude. And maybe we should. If we understood ourselves to be more limited than we did, I don't think we would have done the multiple transgressive things that we've done. And now scrambling to try to preserve a little bit of the forest that's left and so forth. But all of this you can tell how homeless we are. And here's another example. So my wife is French Canadian. And anytime she goes to France, and she's not wild about going to France, but when she does, the French people consider her to be quaint, her accent to be quaint and endearingly old-fashioned, and like some kind of museum, some kind of feel-good museum, And they actually ask her to say things so they can hear, a 16th century French accent. And she doesn't want to be a French person's plaything, because what's on the other side of that, a sense of fundamental personal inadequacy that she can't replicate the Parisian accent. This sounds like it's a nothing story in a time of real serious problems. But I'm using it to suggest to you that the arbitrary isolation that we call the New World is as impoverishing for you where you are as it is impoverishing for us where we are. Finally, I live fairly close to indigenous people who were there a long time before anybody who looked like me was here. And we have a conundrum, but it's not clear that it's a shared one. And it goes like this. Anybody who looks like me in North America wakes up every day, I mean every day, in the absence of what we lost by coming. Everything I've been alluding to, all that cultural continuity, all that understanding about what happens to you when you die, for example. And who is this ground under your feet to you? Not what is it, who is it? All of this is unavailable to us as a consequence of us coming here for a better life. And the indigenous people wake up the same morning that we do, look out the same window, and they do so in the presence of everything they lost because we came. And that's what you did before you turned into us. And that's what I want to do something about, to raise an understanding of what that means, and that we're not victims of this history. But without a lot of alertness, we are perpetrators of this history, even so. So what does this have to do with dirt? Man, everything. Because for once, secular humanist people can talk about things that are not symbolic, that are telluric and actual and mandatory. And dirt's one of those things. P.S. I've been reading how we end up with dirt. I thought I knew. Do you know where dirt comes from?
No, I don't.
It comes from somewhere. This is amazing. We just think, well, there it is. We come from somewhere, and dirt's the somewhere. Nope. And we think, well, there's a fixed amount, It's like God's grace. There's just a fixed amount, and hopefully some comes your way. Nope. They say that the dirt comes from below. That it's not like energy, like Newtonian physics. There's just X amount and it just changes. No, they say it actually gets made, but not by farmers. Farmers use that. It's freaking worms. They say all the new earth comes from below you. It actually rises towards you. I mean, it may not sound that interesting, but the notion that there's more being made somehow suggests that certain things are possible, which the finitude doesn't allow. Certain things are possible. Certain redemptive practices are possible as a consequence of the insane labor of worms beneath us. I mean, if you want a picture of redemption, a kind of redemption we don't seem to deserve, there it is.
Yeah. Wow, Stephen. It is as if it's already taking place, although Neverland will take place in Paris in May. Well, you're alluding to a kind of cosmic third act or something like this, and of longing and belonging. And I'm really looking forward to feeling that, and also, let me say, feel your presence in the flesh there in this little village, because I can feel how, and I'm going to use the word how deep and powerful the truths you articulate are. But I don't have a sense of what will happen when they're articulated while we're all there in the flesh, on the ground, in the same place. So I just leave it open and hope to be receptive to it when we meet in person.
Amen. And believe it or not, I came here to this studio where we're recording our new record, right, for the Grief and Mystery Project. And they asked me if I would do preside over a screening of Grief Walker, which I haven't done for, 10 years. So I don't even remember the film at all. But for those who don't know, it was a National Film Board of Canada made a documentary about my work in the death trade. They brought me to drove me past the theater the other night where the screening is take place. What do you think the name of the theater is? Neverland. So if you wait long enough and you pay attention, the world will say, carry on, son.
Yes. As if we didn't have enough signs. Here's one more.
If there's not enough Neverlands, there's one more with the official title called that.
Yes.
So I was very affirmed in a tragic sort of way by this, that I get to do a screening of a film made about me trying to figure out what dying's all about in a place that's called Neverland. And P.S., folks, you could properly so divide this English word in two, which I also did when I called our session together never land. Not only Neverland, Neverland. Neverland is both a descriptor and a kind of imperative.
Mm-hmm.
It's the sad imperative of homeless people to never land and mistake that for freedom. So we have our work. We'll do okay for 3 days.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome.